I just been waiting for the music to softly fade out. I thoroughly enjoy that. But hey everyone, I'm Jeff Fuller, and I'm joined today by Justin Armenta from JA Digitizing Studios. And I have my monitors on the wrong side. There we go. I was looking all over the place for my stuff, and it was on that monitor, not on this one. So I need to look at this one. But today we will be discussing differences between native files and non-native files or machine files, I guess.
Machine files, yeah.
That I would
or data file, depending on how you call it.
One or the other. It depends on the article that you're looking at. But exactly. I'm going to grab a few comments here. We have Bevy Jean, good evening. Finally back home from your downstate travels. I'm glad you're there and could join us. Dustin, hello from Spokane, Washington. We have Kingsbury Crafts from Washington State. Hello, Gail. And we have Suzanne from Newport, Rhode Island. Hello, Suzanne. So we'll dive into this here. Pretty much what we're going to talk about is in digitizing, you have your softwares file, and which we refer to as your native file. And then you have your non-native files, which are the machine files that you export or the data files that you export. And correct. There's some limitations to each one that you're using, and also the software that you're reading it and looking at it in. So I think that's everything we're going to cover, right, Justin?
Yeah. We're done.
You got this.
So, yeah, the native file is going to be the one specific to your specific software. So the software that, Jeff and I use primarily is WOCOM. So the WOCOM native file is an ENB file. Depending on the major, most popular softwares out there, you have Pulse that I think is PXF. Melco is OFM. And Brilliance is BE, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Wings is Wings actually changed theirs after a certain revamp. It used to be MLS, now it's NGS. But those are the files that whether you're creating either just text in, or you're digitizing yourself, or your digitizer's working in. A lot of times people like finding a digitizer that is using the same software that they have, and they can ask for the native file. And that way, quick, easy adjustments are easily made using the native file. Changing text, especially if it's like a name file or a city and state, they can easily just click on it and it's actually saved in the software's font, so they can easily change it. Stuff like that that's easily changed. There's a lot of times where someone wants a digitizer using their native software. Given that most of the major softwares out there can read the generic machine file, that means they can open up and see the information. That doesn't mean that all the things that their native files can do, especially easily, can be done. Again, depending on your level of software and your editing ability of that software, is really going to dictate how much you can transform those DST files or the many, many other machine files that are out there. I think the DST file is probably the most common and the most used as far as across the board. I'm not sure of any machine, maybe some home machines can't read a DST file, but I'm pretty sure most industrial machines can read a DST file. Correct me if I'm wrong if you do know, Jeff.
I'm not going to correct you. I'm pretty sure every industrial machine out there can read the DST file because it was kind of the gold standard for a really long time.
Exactly.
Home machines, maybe. There might be some that won't read a DST file, but and I'm going to grab a comment because there you go. Eric says, even home machines almost always read DSTs these days.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm trying to think if mine does, but I've never tried.
So, yeah. So, especially when when I get a new customer that's new to the industry or new to embroidery, their first inclinations, because all they're learning is what they have, what they're training on. So if someone buys a Tajima, and Tajima usually sells Pulse software with their machines, they're told, okay, you're working with PXF files. So of course, when they're going out and they're trying to seek out a digitizer, they're going to ask, I need a PXF file. Not knowing you don't need it, you may prefer it, so it's easily edited in your system, but you don't necessarily need it. And there's a lot of times where I'll explain to them, it's like, well, are you specifically looking for a native file because I don't use Pulse? Or is it that you're just wanting that, or do you not understand that you can use a multitude of different file types? I'd say 99% of my customers use DST files, or I give them the EMB files because there's a lot of Wilcom users out there. The main thing is opening up a DST file in any software. It's not going to retain color information. So 9 times out of 10, someone using a software, especially if they're new and they haven't set up their color palettes and whatnot in the software, they're going to open up a file that may be 5 different color changes, and they're going to see the RGB colors, the green, red, yellow, blue, the basic colors that are in the standard palettes that are in these softwares. So they may know, okay, I have a design that has a white element with a blue border and red text, and when they open it up, they're seeing it in yellow, green, and red. And there's some confusion of why they're not seeing the design properly in their software. So that's the biggest thing is any machine file or data file is not going to retain color information except PSC's file, PES files, correct?
Uh-oh. PES files. I want to say the ZSKZOO file does. I think Baradin now also has one that retain colors. Happy has one, but it doesn't retain the colors that exports out of Wilcom because there's a program in the middle that it reads. You have to go through, and so it randomly assigns the colors there. But I know a lot more, and even Eric said here, there is increasing preference for file types that retain colors. And I think that a lot of that is I think a lot of that just goes to confusion. When you get a new operator and they look at their screen and the colors are wrong, I've even seen it on the control panels. They'll be like, wait a minute. It's not the right colors. What's going on?
And that's where the caveat is a DST file is pretty much the most generic file in that it's not made for any specific machine. So when you start getting into the machine files where if someone's specifically asking me for, like someone's comment here, a VP3 for a Viking or a file type for a Happy, I can output in those files that those specific machines that are reading when you're going directly from computer to machine. And I think that's where Eric's referencing. Those file types have come a long way where those will retain color information.
Yep. I'm going to grab a few comments, Justin, because I fell way behind.
Okay.
Hold on. Kingsbury Craft asks, what's your beverage of choice tonight? Liquid. Oh, vitamin there water. You go. Vitamin water. We have Tina here. Hi from Dayton, Tennessee. Hello. We have Lisa from Colorado. Got my shirt today and so excited. As you can tell, I got my shirts today too. Adam was super excited when he found a sweatshirt in there. He subsequently put it on and then took it off and put it in a bag so that he can keep it clean. I laughed a little bit. But we have Cindy. Good evening. Just leaving a choir concert. Drive safely. We have Rich from Lake Stevens, Washington. Hello. We have Bob joining us. Good evening. And Lisa says, home machines that use a USB can usually read DST files. I did not know that. We have MN Custom Made. Barb. Hi, Jeff. Hi, Justin. Or hi, Justin. Hi, Jeff. Hello. Suzanne says, when I export a DST file to a thumb drive from Wilcom 4.5, it also sends a DGT file. What is that file, and can I set it something so it's not there? And Eric actually answered that just a couple comments down. DGT file is a thumbnail image of the embroidery file. So you can actually turn off the DGT file in Wilcom. I've done it, and I don't remember how. It's in one of the settings or the export options. You can tell it not to export that DGT file. But we have Kingsbury Crafts. Hello. We have Letty installing Wilcom 4.5 and joining us. Hello, Letty. Fun day is always install new software day. Minnesota Custom Made. Again, it's Barb. I should read her name first, but I only get the beginning of it. VB3 Files retain color for my Viking Ruby. We have Frank Dunn joining us from the UK. I can't think today. It's coming. TBF for Tajima now. Most home formats have something, but may not retain real colors. So I know that that's something that happens too. I want to say that the Jeff format, which is what I have on my Genome, my home machine, it can save the red. You can specify the output red, blue. And I think it comes across in real colors, but I'm not 100% sure. Eric says, also not all software saves properly formatted machine files. Raise your hand if you've had the phantom needle center drop on some formats.
Yes, so that is definitely an issue that I've seen over the years. I think I've tracked it down to when there's a big gap in technology and versions of software that come out, that this happens. I have a customer that I've used that I've digitized for probably 20 years now. And for the longest time, I was giving him DST files. I think he's got brother machines. And out of the blue, he was saying, I'm getting this drop stitch in the center. I try to insert trim codes. I try to save the DST, open the DST in the software, remove the and I would see these drop stitches when he's sending me back, and then I'd set trim codes. Didn't work. Started sending him PES files. That's what it is. It's CS Brother software, and then they could read PES files. And I had to. There's so many versions when you're actually saving, outputting into these different machine file types. There's actually different versions, and in Wilcom you can set your machine settings to certain machines. So I had to find that happy area where it's a machine setting and a version of the PES where he wouldn't have that drop stitch in the center. So that could be pretty frustrating when you're trying to send designs and you're getting these weird things that no one can figure out how. Yeah, I remember there was a file that I was sending Eric probably like 5 years ago. That it was a PES file that I was sending the design to this customer, and I had sent a couple designs to her with no problem, and she kept on saying that her software wasn't. Her software or her machine wasn't reading my file, and turns out I didn't know that there was a size restriction to the PES file, where if it was over a certain size, it wouldn't read because it was a certain hoop that was being used. So I was literally like a millimeter too wide, and it wasn't. And I've seen people come back saying, "Oh, my machine's giving me a rack limit, or it's telling me the design's too big or whatnot," but it wasn't telling you that. It just wouldn't read the design. So that's what it was. There was a size restriction. I scaled it down like 1%, and it was fine.
Yeah, I had that with my home machine. And it actually, before I exported it out, it wanted me to select the hoop size. So I had to select the larger hoop size in the software to be able to send out the larger design. And it's really frustrating when you have something weird like that they retain, and there's really no way around it other than a lot of guessing in Google forum searches.
Right.
So exactly. We're going to grab a couple more here. We have Cindy saying, when I send a file over to my Baradin, I have to still put my colors in according to which needle has what color. I have seen that now where you can just say, you know what, the file goes, okay, these 7 color changes are the exact same color. So what needle are these 7 color changes? And you only have to input each color one time, and then it will assign the rest of the line. Which,
if you're never changing your colors out on your machine.
well, I mean, come on, who changes the colors on their machine? No, you set it right before you run the file, so you've got the colors already on your machine. You just tell it which needle number it's going to use.
Gotcha.
And it just knows that all of the stops in that file, which ones are the same color and which ones are different. Which, for things that I do, like team names, where I'll do one color and the other color, and they'll just alternate to the between colors. That could be devastating. I don't know. I haven't had that feature yet. I haven't had to worry about that. But it seems like something I want to find out, I guess. We have Lyndon. Hi, guys. Love our new shirts. They came out really nice. Justin's company, Aztec Embroidery, right? No, Aztec Embroidery. Yep.
Aztec Embroidery, yeah.
They screen printed them all. They came out really, really nice. It was really nice having them made again this year, and hopefully next year we'll have a funner design. I don't know. I'm really partial to the first 2 designs, but maybe that's just because I made them. We'll see. Barb LaFawn says, Cindy, I have to do the same for my Avance Multi-Needles DST. Frank says, we're all out of sync, like watching a spaghetti western. Hopefully, if you hop off and hop back on, it'll look a little better, or at least jump over to YouTube. And we have Suzanne that's also wearing her nerd shirt. So for those of you that missed it, we do run the Embroidery Nerd shirts once a year. This was this year's design, and next year, coming up in 2023, we'll have some new design. We haven't decided what that is yet. Justin, I think it's Justin's turn to come up with the next 2.
I'll come up with something.
Or Matt's. I'm sure somebody will come up with something. But we have Cindy. I love my shirt. Was going to give my son one of them, but I may keep it too. Absolutely. Keep them all. And Letty says, I'm loving my nerd shirt. So glad I bought a sweatshirt. Perfect weather for it today. See, Justin, I told you we needed to do sweatshirts. I'm not going to say I told you so, but.
I mean, if we stick in the March time that we did it the last 2 years, I guess I need to think outside the box and not just think Arizona weather, because come March, you're not wearing sweatshirts in March in Arizona. So, but
it's 40 degrees in Iowa.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the start of sweatshirt weather. And then in another week, it'll be summer weather. And then in another week, it'll be winter weather. And then, it just kind of bounces back and forth. But I see you've got something that you want to pull up here on screen, Justin. We'll go ahead and
I'm actually Matt, when we were discussing our topic today, Matt reminded us that he actually wrote an article on this very subject, and I reviewed it. I posted the link here for you guys. It is actually discussing exactly what we're talking about, DST color changes, DST versus EMB. There's a really good explanation on it here. What happens, like especially when you're trying to scaling things. When you're working with a native file, your software is going to have what's called a stitch processor. So if you have a 1 inch by 1 inch filled area, say it has 1,200 stitches, and you scale that up, it's going to calculate how many stitches that it needs to stay at that same density for the larger size. So it's going to process the stitches and figure out how many stitches are needed. A DST file, let me see if I can zoom in here.
Control and scroll.
There we go.
I may know about that because I accidentally do it all the time.
So in a native file, if you scale something up, the distance between the stitches is going to stay the same, but it's going to add to them to make up the area that it's covering. In a DST file, when you scale it up, it's going to take those same amount of points that are in that line, and it's just going to spread them out between the 2 points. It's not going to actually fill in the amount of stitches needed to scale up proportionately. Now, if your system has a stitch processor, it will do this, but there's a lot of times where some weird stuff goes on when you're trying to, especially with scaling. I'm going to actually pull up a file here that it's a DST file that someone sent me today. I was just reviewing it, making a couple changes, and just changing the density on some lettering completely distorted the letter. And I'll show you the things that you need to basically be aware of if you are taking in a DST file, whether you have a new software like Wilcom, like I know a few of us, Letty, and then a couple of other people have got. So they might be bringing in old files that they used to have in their old software using the DST file, want to make a change. These are the type of things that you need to be aware of when you are working with a machine file.
Now, I want to interject something in here because I want to interject. But when you're using scaling on your machine, I am not aware of a machine that has any stitch processors in it. So when you're doing scaling on your machine, whether larger or smaller, you're essentially just moving those points further away and closer back together.
Correct.
That's very, very hard. Now, when you do what Justin was talking about, when you're importing a DST file or a machine file into your software, it depends on the software, because each of them do kind of like an object recognition, and they try to make sense of what the file is and convert it into objects, which has varying success. I want to say the best software I've seen do it is probably in Brilliance so far. But they all break up those different objects and assign it different properties. And so if I send Justin an EMB file and he clicks on a satin stitch and moves it and the underlay stays where it is, he's going to know that I imported a stitch file and that it broke it into two separate objects instead of keeping it together.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's another thing too. When someone asks for a lot of times you see these digitizers that are advertising, I can give it to you in all these native file types. They're not using 8 different softwares. What they're doing is they have their main software they digitize in, and somehow or another they are converting it or saving it in just that native file type. So like you said, I can create an EMB file, save it to a DST, call it back up in Wilcom, save it as an EMB file, and it's not a true EMB file.
Right. It's still a DST file. It's like saving a bitmap in a vector. You're just wrapping a shell around it.
Exactly. Like, yeah, there's a lot of times where people will have a JPEG, they save it in Illustrator, send an Illustrator file and say, well, yeah, it's an Illustrator file, it's a vector. No, you're using a vector software to save a JPEG, an embedded JPEG. Same with an embroidered file. You're just embedding that data stitch file or that machine file into a window that your native file is saving. So yes, that's right off the bat. When someone sends me a file and they may say, oh, I have the EMB file, can you check it out and see, what's going on with it? I can know in 2 seconds if it's a true EMB file or not.
Right. And here's something also that you need to consider, and I've actually seen this wreak havoc on files, is if I take a DST file and I send it to Justin, and Justin opens it up in Wilcom, makes some edits, that DST file has went through a stitch processor and it assigned all the needle points. The second that you open it back up and break it into objects, and then you save it out again, it's now running it through a stitch processor the second time. So depending on the settings of the stitch processor on the second piece of software that it runs through, it can take things out or add things in to that file that aren't supposed to be there. And one of the more common things that I've seen it do is rip out lock stitches, because the short stitch setting will be different between the two softwares, and it'll see the lock stitches as too short of stitches and it'll rip them out. And now you've just introduced a massive problem on your machine, because if it ties in and starts sewing and there's no tie in, then the thread's going to come out of the needle. And at the end, when it doesn't lock, it'll still trim, but you run your finger across it and now it's going to start coming undone.
Right. Because there's a lot of times there is settings, or in depending on what software you have, but like you said, there's settings where you can say remove all stitches under this length. And so, like you said, if it's been saved that many times and you're going through all these filters, then yeah, there's a lot of information that you do lose.
And software doesn't, there's no standard across them. They all kind of have their own default settings. And I'm going to pull this up from Eric, and he says, even just opening and resaving can kick off filters. Short and long stitch filtering is really common. If you just want to view a file and send it to your machine without alteration, open it, look at it, don't resave and use the original file. And that's actually something I've done when I've helped customers troubleshoot, because I'll send them a design and really weird stuff will happen. And I'll say, are you using the file that the machine file that I sent, or are you opening it up in your software? And if the answer is I'm opening it up in my software, I say, try to use the one that I sent and see if the problems go away.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of times where, just me using a file and someone's having a problem with it, and I send it to my machine, and I know I'm just calling it up, sending to my machine, and it runs a certain way. But there's that, it could be an unconscious step that they're doing that's just changing in that little way that's affecting the file, and it's not giving them good results.
Or they don't know. I mean, that's something too. When you get a lot of new operators, they want to see the file. When you send it to them, they want to see it. They want to pull it up in their software. Most machines come bundled with software. They'll open it up, they'll look at it, they'll send it back out, and they don't realize that they're running it through a stitch processor a second time and causing themselves headaches.
Right. So I'm going to show, there's a DST file that has some real simple text. I was reviewing it for a customer, just having some issues. Basically, I just saw that I needed to add some density to it. But, looking at this, it's like, oh, well, I know, like Jeff mentioned earlier, I can tell it's a DST because when I move this satin, the underlay stays there. Because in a native file, even breaking this apart, if I move that letter, not only is the letter all together, but even if it is broken into segments, I move that file, all the underlay goes with it. So I know that when I click on it, it's got all the information as far as settings of satin, my density, auto split, underlay, all that. This here, it's going to show me that it is a satin, and there's times where you know that it sews like a satin, it looks like a satin, but you click on it and the settings are telling you that it's a fill stitch. And those are those weird quirks that when you are opening a DST file in your native software that you may run into. I have not seen any rhyme or reason of why. One thing, I know a few things why when you're bringing in a data file, but there's certain things just like, okay, why is that treating, even though it looks like a fill and it's got the same density as a fill, but in the settings, it's calling it a satin. So just grabbing onto this, I know that it needed more density. I put more density to it. And if you can see here, this S got a little weird in the bottom here. And if I go back and actually look at this at just outlines, even though you can see the stitches are in the correct place, the outline of this object when importing this DST file, for whatever reason, this outline is way off. So it's staying at the density and it's staying at the shape that it is when I call it in, but because of that particular element and that outline is wrong, as soon as I apply a new setting, it's going to go by what the outline is. So, if this is a DST file that you're needing to make that change, there's really no way around it not doing this other than going into your node editing, and you're going to have to come in here and clean up the angles and the nodes so it's the correct shape.
Lots of nudging.
Yes.
And it looks there, you'll notice that there are a lot of nodes there. And when you're bringing and it's pulling objects and converting stitch, stitches into objects, it's going to put a lot of nodes on there. Anytime you're auto converting anything, it's going to throw a lot of nodes on there just because it's trying to make sense of, hey, here's this curve. I need to follow this curve. We're going to go nuts.
Right. And as you can see there, because there were so many different objects in there and I was trying to move the angles and it kept on giving me a bad angle error, is because I didn't see that they were crossing over each other. If you try to cross over another angle, sometimes it gives you a weird bad reshape. Yep. So if it's giving you that information, you need to kind of zoom in more and figure out what's going wrong with it. But that's one major issue that I've seen when changing densities. You could run into that. And again, most softwares do have some sort of view change. There's, the true view or the real view where it shows you 3D stitches like this. You have it where it just shows the stitches, or you have an outline. And a lot of times you'll see the outline differences on something that's not necessarily going to be there. If you do see it in a wireframe is another term for it, outline look. Just where you can see everything's broken up into basically shapes and elements. It's no longer, even though it's wording and it's text, it's no longer a font. It's not a changeable font where you can just click on it and change the spelling on it. It's just broken up into a bunch of objects, even from the satin stitches to the now the underlay is now basically a running stitch in itself. It's not a underlay setting on that particular satin. So that's the differences where if I was working on this in the software, whether I digitized it or it's a stock font in Wilcom, that's stuff that I can just easily click on the object as a whole or the words as a whole and just change those settings as far as underlay and whatnot.
All right, so I'm going to grab a comment from Eric here that says the conversions are tracing the stitch points at the edge. You'll see issues with automatic short stitching inside tight curves because the stitch points on the edge are popping in and out of line. I take your word for it. I believe it.
Yeah, so within the settings and in the softwares and the settings that you choose, going around curves, there is going to be short stitches. So instead of, if you have a curve like an O, the bottom of an O, that inside of that O, you're not going to jam the same amount of stitches that you are going to the outside of the O. So you may have one that goes from edge to edge, and then your next stitch is shorter. And those are purposely done so you don't have so many needle penetrations on the inside of that curve. It's a tighter curve. So in your native file, when the computer's generating that calculation of how many short stitches, and there is settings of if you want short stitches and whatnot, but bringing that DST file in, now it's going to actually look at it as node points. So you're going to see this zigzag of where the regular length stitch is and then the node where the short stitch is. So you're going to have this weird zigzag pattern of nodes, which usually it's about 100 of them in a 3 millimeter area that you have to go in and change quite a bit.
So I'm going to grab a comment from Cindy here. I cannot alter a DST file that we made here in our old software unless I do some of the things like Jeff talks about, going by objects. Now, I do want to note that when you import, and in Wilcom, when you open up a DST file, you have two options. A lot of people don't go into those options, but you can actually tell Wilcom, I want you to open up as stitch data. I don't want you to break it into objects. I just want the raw stitch data. And when you open it that way, it'll pull in on the color object list. It'll pull it in as manual stitches, and it'll all be just big chunks of manual stitches. And you can know that you're not converting things or changing objects that way. I've seen it when you get into some of the complicated stuff, that when you open it up as a machine file in the software can't tell what it's supposed to be. And so it just throws a lot of random objects together, and it'll actually change the entire shape of the design just by opening it. And that's it. Not without making any settings, without changing anything. It'll just open it and it'll immediately mess it up. And you look at it and you're like, that's not what's supposed to be there. Right. So it really comes down to you have to know, do I plan on editing this when I open it, or do I really just want to view it and send it to the machine?
Right. Yeah. I mean, given that, I guess I'm a little biased because I'm a Wilcom user. I I think out of the softwares that I've used, because I digitized in Wings for many, many, many years, and if I had to edit a DST file, I'd use Wilcom hands down. I think it's got the most intuitive way of breaking down the elements and allowing you to grab individual elements. And if you do have the capabilities of digitizing and the know-how, you could very easily grab this file. If that S did that weird thing and you don't want to go in and clear out 100 different nodes because it's doing something weird, you can just digitize the S within that DST file and just sequence it the way it's supposed to sequence. But there's a lot of things you can do with Wilcom, and it allows you to kind of get down to the nitty gritty of editing individual elements. One thing, given that this, say like this is a pretty intricate font, I don't have a stock font that matches, I don't want to take the time to digitize it. And say like their issue was there was way too much underlay. For a really thin serif font like this, the original digitizer, the original person that set up this text had double zigzag, edge run, and a center rock.
They checked all the boxes.
Yeah, checked all the boxes for underlay. There's a lot of times where, because, like I said, the satin stitch is its own element and the underlay is another. If I were to go in and grab the satin, even though I can change the underlay setting in Wilcom, but now you're actually adding to it because now that element has underlay on top of what's already there. So a lot of times I'll just, if I know that kind of the shell of what I need is just the satin stitches of this text, in Wilcom you can select by stitch types. Oops. And so I selected all the satin stitches. And if I just move that away and gives all the underlay, so say like this was all the crazy underlay under here, I can just delete it. Now I'm working with just the satin stitches that I can go in and change those settings. But another thing you have to worry about is a lot of times, especially with serif fonts, it's treating some of these serifs as they were running or manual stitches. So if you can see the bottom of the T here is missing, we probably go through here.
You can see the U.
There's a gap in the U. There's this part of the E that's missing, a little bit of the S. So even though all in one swoop, I was able to remove all the necessary underlay that I don't want, I created another problem with deleting part of the letters that I'm going to have to go in and adjust. Which again, you start getting into node editing, you can reshape your parts to see how these kind of weird stuff that it decided to do. There's a part here that had that part of the serif of the E, and this part is part of the horizontal and vertical parts. These are the type of things that you need to recognize, that when you are kind of getting into quite a bit of editing, these are things that you're going to be facing. So not only is part of the letters missing, but as you can see, because I eliminated manual or running stitches, I eliminated a lot of the travel stitches. So your start and end points aren't matching up, so you're going to have a lot of jumps. So you're going to have to worry about sequencing. So a lot of times, something like this where it's a pretty basic font, and I could probably digitize it or use the stock font a lot quicker than trying to manipulate this. I'd probably go that route. If there's a lot involved in digitizing, or a lot involved with trying to recreate it, then yeah, it might be quicker just to kind of go in here, eliminate all that problematic underlay, do my settings the way I need to, change the sequencing so it sews properly, and then you're done. But
so one thing I want to point out here too is you can see all those now very large jump stitches on all the letters. So it effectively, as far as I'm aware, when you grab all the upper stitching like that, usually the lock stitches are now designated as manual, and then it throws trim commands in there. So when you select all the satins off the top and you pull it down, and you delete everything else, now you've deleted all the traveling stitches, which are going to run between the separate objects, and generally you delete your lock stitches and your trims. And so now you have to go back in and make all those changes. And it's really, it's being cognizant about those changes that you have to change when you do something like this, versus you do something like this and you get what we can see on screen and you don't really know how to fix it.
Exactly. So yeah, so now we're at a point where this is for a hat, so it's sewing center out. You can see how it's just kind of jumping around now from element to element. You might have a couple of closest point connections there, but like, yeah, every element is basically sewing in the direction that it was digitized in, and it's just jumping over to the next one because I did eliminate all those traveling stitches. So before this O may have ended here, had a travel stitch up to the top of the S, so that's why there's that jump. Yeah, the sequencing is definitely something that if you are eliminating a lot of the stitch types or a lot of the elements to try to clean up too many stitches, this is what you're gonna have to run into as far as sequencing and making sure that you know it is sewing properly with the new settings that you are going to apply to these elements.
Yeah. So I'm going to grab a couple of comments here real quick. We have Eric saying the processor sincerely obliterates textures frequently as well. I believe it when you start getting into those short stitches and long stitches. I can be honest with you that it took me a long time before I even knew where I could go in and change that. And on some softwares you can't, but on some softwares you can go adjust those numbers a little bit. And I mean, I wouldn't recommend adjusting something if you don't know what it does.
Right.
And Eric says, if you're constantly editing your Digitizers files, you may have a Digitizer problem, not an editing problem. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And just taught an editing class at DAX multiple times. The message was only edit from a machine file when you must. Yep. So if you can get a native file and you can get that edit, then it's going to be a lot better than trying to edit a machine file, which I think is one reason why people, you know, if they have a digitizer that they're coming back with edits, they will go out and get the same software that their digitizer has, or before they even start, they'll say, I'm using, you know, let's say I'm using Melco software. Is there a digitizer that digitizes in Melco? And now it really falls on top of them that you have to know, is the digitizer digitizing it all in Melco Design Shop, or are they digitizing in Wilcom, importing a machine file, and then saving it in Melco Design Shop? Because that's really going to affect how you're able to edit your files.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Back to Eric's comment, it's actually kind of why I got into digitizing at the time that I did. The embroidery house that I was managing at the time, we had probably one of the best digitizers I've ever seen that used to do all our stuff. And he ended up retiring and change of career. And when he went away, that was right around the time where, I mean, this guy was literally, we would send him, as in US mail, the art, and he would send us a disc back. And that was right around the time where things were going digital, and you could send, you know, digital files to people, and they would send the digital file back. And we were going through digitizer after digitizer after digitizer. And like Eric said, I was spending half the time editing half of it just to make it so right that I started referring back to that original digitizer's file saying, why do his work so well? And I would go through and recognize, okay, he did it this way, he did text this way, he did, you know, whatever it may be. And learning those things and you know, implementing them into my editing, it got to a point where it's like, I just need to do this myself. And that's when, you start looking into the very expensive software back in the day.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's cost a fortune, right?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna grab a comment here because I want to. But Suzanne says, I remember when a 2-week turnaround was normal for digitizing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't imagine paying the rush fee if you needed it one day. They'd probably just tell you no.
No, back then there was like, what? No. So let me open up. I went back and I just grabbed like some really, really old DST files in my archive, and just started trying to grab them and started playing with them to see if anything changes. One thing that I noticed on this one, if say like we were grabbing this and we were wanting to scale it up, as you can see, there's some fill areas, satin stitches for the border, and the text. And say I wanted to grab it and I just wanted to scale this up 15%. So the main thing that I saw right off the bat was this satin here now has a split stitch. So Wilcom wanted to grab that and apply a split stitch to it. So, I mean, it's easily solved. I just turn auto split off. But those are the things where, especially if it's a DST file that you've never used before, I would study it, print it out, even see where type of stitches are where. Click on areas and see what settings and stuff are, and then make your change. And you're really going to want to run through your design and see if anything weird happens. Because those are the quirks that if this was an EMB file that someone sent me and I scaled it up 15%, there's probably not a single thing I needed to change in this particular file for it to work. I mean, the stitch types are fine. The way it's set up as is, 15% in a native file, not a care in the world. Another thing that I noticed, like on this one, so if I hide others, so if this were a native EMB file, this fill would be all one object, because when I digitize the shape, it's all going to be one piece. So again, another way to identify if something is truly native to Wilcom specifically. Someone sent me this file, say they sent it in an EMB file. If I go and grab this shape and I see it's broken into segments, I know it's not a true EMB file. And as you can see here, even part of this fill, it recognized one stitch of that fill as a running stitch and not a fill stitch. So a lot of times that's a drawback too, where it's not just a matter of, okay, I'm taking this design and I want to put it on a beanie or a golf towel. So I know the fill stitches are going to need a little bit more density and underlay. You can't just grab one object, change it, good to go. Now you're going in there and you're going to try to find, if you look at this stitch list over here, instead of this being just one object with your settings that you set, this has 17 different elements in it. So now you're going in here and you're trying to find all your fill and see, according to Wilcom, this is treating this part as a satin stitch, or it's calling a satin stitch when it's actually a fill stitch. Yep. So you can't even rely on the little icons that Wilcom's giving you over here. They give you a little object type. The little C looking one is a fill. The one that's got the lines and the dots is a manual. The one that has the two black dots with the white dots in the middle, that's a running stitch. The one that has the point counterpoint, or that looks like a satin stitch, that's the satin stitch. So again, you can't rely on Wilcom's settings per se to tell you exactly what the machine file type is. You can go in there, and so this is the one that they're calling a satin. Even though the stitch type is recognizing as a satin, it's still a fill. It's a tatami fill stitch, and you can change the density settings and the stitch length just like you would a native file. So there's those crossover areas where you can manipulate the settings on different elements, but it's not true to grab that whole element that you digitize just once, as in the native file. So,
Yep.
do you have a
All right,
question?
Justin. Well, I think we should wrap up just a little bit early. I know that you had a hard out at the hour, so
Yeah.
we'll give you a little bit of time that you can jump out a little early and get some whatever you need to get done. But hopefully this was a productive. I mean, I feel like it was a really productive conversation. Hopefully it helped you guys out there in the audience, out there on the internet. We'll go with that. Hopefully it helped you guys out there on the internet that you were able to pick up and at least learn something. So now you can make decisions based off of that.
Yeah. So one other thing the thing that actually sparked me to as far as the idea to talk about this, there were some people in the group talking about retaining the color information. As you can see on these files that I did open up, they are just opening just by the standard palette. When a digitizer should send you a spec sheet or a run sheet showing you the sequence of the file that they're sending to you, that hopefully there's a sample, at least a digital sample, if not a sewn sample, and it's showing you the sequence and the elements they digitize it at. That doesn't necessarily mean that their color change one is going to correlate to your machine needle one. It's just showing you where the color breaks are. So even though you may call this, say like the eagle was a black head, gold bill, white outline, you're calling it up like this, it's not necessarily, it's not dictating the colors you have to use. Basically, it's just showing you where the color changes are. So there's a big difference in retaining a color information as far as calling up the file and seeing it on screen in the perfect colors that it's supposed to be. I would just basically make sure you follow the spec sheet from your digitizer. It's going to show you the sequence of the way it sews, and that's where you're going to take it to your machine and say, hey, machine, I want you to sew needle 1, needle 5, needle 7, and so forth. So if you have anything going on, Jeff?
No, I don't. I mean, other than Applique Getaway, we're getting ready to do that. We should be heading out there in July. I don't know if you've started on your class yet or not.
No.
Me either. So
I have part of mine done already, just because I've taught it before. But yeah, I definitely want to kind of adjust it and pivot a little bit for the specifically the Applique Getaway show. But I do have I know there's a week of a lot of holidays, and I do have some designs that I'll be releasing in the next couple of days for you guys to check out for the few holidays we have coming up.
Yep, I will say I've seen them. They're pretty good. I think there are a couple that I really like. So hopefully you guys are able to capitalize on those. But I'm going to grab just a couple more comments here. We have Cindy saying, Justin, I hope you will show the sequence information at Applique Getaway. I'd like to see it in person, the designs with no sequence. So you can throw that into your class too. There you go. And we have Danny saying, are those classes going to be virtual? So I believe the Applique Getaway is all going to be in person. I don't think that they may have one or two virtual ones, but as far as I'm aware, it's in person because I'm going to Texas. So pretty sure it's in person because I'm going there.
Right.
But Letty says, woohoo, I can't wait to see them. I need to run my new ones this weekend. We have Kingsbury Craft saying, I learned a lot. Thank you. Barb saying, quite an eye-opener on native files. And Cindy, I always appreciate the great information. We're happy that you guys are getting good information out of this, and hopefully it helps you in your jobs.
Yeah.
Job position. Embroidery. I should have said embroidery. I'm fired. But I don't know if you have anything else you want to throw in there, Justin, before we head off.
No, I think that's it for today.
All right, awesome. So that is Justin Armenta from JA Digitizing Studios, and I'm Jeff Fuller from Fuller Embroidery Works, and we're both here representing the embroidery nerd. I'd like to thank you guys for hanging out with you, and we'll catch you next time.
Good night, guys.